Hello YouTube. Today I want to tell you more about ancient Egypt, and I want to start with a very interesting novel, virtually unknown outside of Eastern Europe. Pharaoh is the fourth and large major novel by the Polish writer Bolesław Prus, who lived between the years of 1847 to 1912. Bolesław Prus is the literary pseudonym of the Polish writer, journalist, and public figure Alexander Glowacki, composed over 1 year's time in 1894 to 1895. It was published in the book form in 1897, and it was his only historical novel, which is very interesting. It's set, the Pharaoh, the book is set in the Egypt of 1087 to 1085 BC, as that country experiences internal stresses and external threats that will culminate in the fall of its 20th dynasty and the new kingdom. Well, before writing Pharaoh, this is important, Prus immersed himself in ancient Egyptian history, geography, customs, religion, art, and writings. Though Prus was not a historian, and apart from the Pharaoh, he did not write, like I said, any other historical novels, it is regarded, that book, as superior to any other novel on ancient Egypt. From available sources, Prus drew information and authentic ancient texts and worked with them as vital elements into his masterpiece. And in spite of translations into a lot of languages, however, it still remains little known in the wider world, and that's too bad. I would love to know what sources Prus used, because the information he provided is incredible, fascinating, and gripping. Nevertheless, Pharaoh is remarkably accurate even from the standpoint of present-day Egyptology. The novel does a notable job of recreating a primal ancient civilization, complete with the geography, climate, plants, animals, ethnicities, countryside, agriculture, cities, trades, commerce, social stratification, politics, religion, and warfare. Well, Prus succeeds remarkably in transporting readers back to the Egypt of 31 centuries ago. I provided enough information for those interested to find the book and read it. It is available in English and several other languages. For those who love ancient mysteries, they will find a lot. Just a few episodes I want to share with you, because I want you to read the book, and there is much more. But those ones I found very interesting based on my interest and research. Here is the first one, about most unusual means of remote vision in antiquity. At command of the heir, numerous small detachments of cavalry spied the neighborhood in every direction to learn if a hostile army were not hidden somewhere. Even the priests, who had brought with them a small chapel of Ammon, went to the summit of the highest hill and held a religious service. Then, returning to the camp, they assured Ramses that a crowd of some thousands of unarmed Libyans were approaching, but that there was no army at any point, at least none within a 15-mile radius. The prince laughed at the report. "I have good sight," said he, "but I could not see an army at that distance." The priests, after they counseled together, informed the prince that if he would bind himself not to tell the uninitiated what he saw, he would learn that it was possible to see at great distances. Ramses took an oath. The priests placed the altar of Ammon on an elevation and began prayers. When the prince had washed, removed his sandal, offered to the god a gold chain and incense, they conducted him to a small box which was perfectly dark, and told him to look at one of the walls in it. After a while, sacred hymns were intoned, during which a bright circle appeared on the box. Soon the bright color grew darker. The prince saw a sandy plain in the midst of its cliffs, and near them an Asiatic outpost. The priests sang with more animation, and the picture changed. Another patch of the desert was visible, and on it a group of people who looked no larger than ants. Still, the movements and dress, and even the faces of the persons, were so definite that the prince could describe them. The astonishment of the heir knew no bounds. He rubbed his eyes, touched the moving picture. Suddenly he turned away his face, the picture vanished, and darkness remained. So, my audience, what was it? Voice-activated ancient television? Remote vision? You tell me. But there is more. In this episode, a high priest has to find directions in the desert. Pentuer was silent, as if not hearing the question, and drew out slowly from his wonderful bag a small statue of divinity with crossed arms. The statue hung from a string. The priest let it hang and whispered a prayer. While he watched it, the statue, after some turnings and quivering, hung without motion. Ramesses, by the light of the torch, looked at this act with astonishment. "What are you doing?" asked he. "I can only say this much to you, worthiness," replied Pentuer, "that this divinity points with one hand at the star Eshmun. This hand leads Phoenician ships through the sea during night hours." By the way, Eshmun is the polar star. The god which points one hand always to the star Eshmun is known only to us and the priests of Chaldea, but ask not to explain temple secrets. By the aid of this god, every prophet, night and day, in bad and good weather, can find his way on the sea or in the desert. So this was an ancient compass. Okay? The book also described the powerful Chaldean priest who arrived in Egypt to conclude a special international treaty with the leaders of the Egyptian priests, who considered the Chaldean priests to be elder brothers of the Egyptians. You will be amazed at the abilities of Beroes, the main priest who arrived from Chaldea, about levitation, hypnosis, and much more. You will learn about the subterranean parts of the Temple of Set and what took place there, and the existence of the underground temple by the Sphinx, and of course the labyrinth. But I leave it to your readings. But the most amazing story is the one of the rebellious priest Samentu from the Temple of Set. He told the Pharaoh this, and I want to read this to you, interjecting sometimes comments, but I want you to get the feel of what he said. I will tell you at once why I passed to the service of Set. They sent me to the peninsula of Sinai to build a small chapel for miners. The labor of building continued 6 years. I had much free time and wandered among mountains, examining the caves in them. What have I not seen in those places? Corridors so long that it took hours to pass through them, narrow entrances through which if a man passes, he must crawl on his stomach. Chambers so immense that in each a whole temple might find room sufficient. I saw underground rivers, lakes, crystal chambers, dens totally dark in which no man could see his own hand. Again, others in which there was so much light as if the second sun had been shining there. How often have I been lost in countless passages? How often has my torch gone out? How often was I approaching an unseen precipice? I have passed many days in subterranean places, living on parched barley, licking the moisture from wet rocks, not knowing whether I should ever see this upper world again. but I gained experience. My vision grew sharp, and I even came to love those underground regions. And today, when I think of the childish recesses of the labyrinth, I'm ready for laughter. Edifices built by man are like molehills when compared with the immense structures reared by those silent and invisible earth spirits. But once I met a dreadful thing which brought me to change my position. West from the quarries of Sinai is a group of ravines and mountains, among which subterranean thunders are heard frequently. The earth trembles and flames are seen sometimes. I was made curious, so I went there for a long visit. I sought, and thanks to a small opening, I discovered a whole chain of immense caves, under the arches of which it would have been possible to place the largest pyramid. When I wandered into those places, I was met by a smell of putrefactions, a smell so strong that I wished to flee from it. But conquering myself, I entered the cave whence it came, and beheld, imagine, Lord, a man with legs and arms, shorter by 1/2 than ours, but thick, awkward, and with claws at their extremities. Add to this figure a broad tail, flattened at the side, indented like the comb of a cock, a very long neck, and on it a dog's head. Finally dress this monster in armor, covered on the back with carved spikes. Now imagine that figure standing on its feet with arms and breast resting against a cliff. That was something very ugly, put in Ramesses. I should have killed it immediately. It was not ugly, answered Samentu, shaking himself. For think, Lord, that monster was as tall as an obelisk pillar. Ramesses made a movement of displeasure. Samentu, said he, it seems to me that you visited your caves in a dream. Well, Samentu swore by people dear to him that he was telling the truth. Let's continue his narrative. Yes, that monster in the skin of a reptile, covered with a scaly armor, if lying on the ground, would with its tail be 50 places long. In spite of fear and repulsion, I returned a number of times to that cave and examined the creature most carefully. Then it was alive. No, it was dead. Dead at a very long time, but preserved like our mummies. The great dryness of the air preserved it, and perhaps some salt of the earth unknown to me. That was my last discovery, continued Samentu. I went no more into caves, for I meditated greatly. Samentu came to a conclusion. Osiris creates lions, elephants, horses, and Set gives birth to serpents, bats, crocodiles. The monster which he met is surely the creation of Set, and since it exceeds everything known by people under the sun, Set is mightier god than Osiris. So he turned to Set, and on returning to Egypt fixed himself in his temple. When he told the priests of his discovery, they explained to Samentu that they knew a great many monsters of that sort. Samentu drew breath and told the Pharaoh this. Should the Pharaoh desire to visit their temple at any time, the priest will show him wondrous and terrible beings and coffins, geese with lizards' heads and bats' wings, lizards like swans, but larger than ostriches, crocodiles 3 times as long as those which live now in the Nile, frogs as bulky as mastiffs. Those are mummies or skeletons found in caves and preserved in their coffins. People think that the priests adore them, but they merely save them from decay and examine their structure. I shall believe you when I see them myself, replied the Pharaoh. But tell me, whence could such creatures come? The world in which we live, Holiness, has suffered great changes. In Egypt itself we find ruins of cities and temples hidden in the earth deeply. There was a time when when that which is now Lower Egypt was an arm of the sea, and the Nile flowed through the whole width of our valley. Still earlier, the sea was here, where this kingdom is now. Our ancestors inhabited the region which the western desert has taken. Still earlier, tens of thousands of years ago, the people were not as we are. They rather resemble monkeys, but they knew how to build huts, they had fire, and they used stones and clubs in fighting. There were no horses in those days, nor bulls. White elephants, rhinoceros, and lions were 3 or even 4 times as large as those beasts are in our time. But enormous elephants were not the first creatures. Before them lived immense reptiles, flying, swimming, and walking. Earlier, the reptiles in this world were earlier than the reptiles in this world. There were only snails and fish, and before them only plants. But plants such as exist not at present. And still earlier, inquired Ramesses, still earlier the earth was empty and void, and the Spirit of God moved over the waters. I have heard something of this, said Ramesses, but I shall not believe it till you show me mummies of monsters, which, as you say, are in your temple. With permission, Holiness, I will finish what I have begun, said Samen II. When I saw that immense body in the cave at Sinai, fear seized me, and for 2 years or more I entered no cave of any kind. But when priests of Set explained to me the origin of such wonderful creatures, my alarm vanished, and curiosity rose up in place of it. I have no pleasanter amusement today than to wander in subterranean places and search for ways amid darkness. For this reason, the labyrinth will not cause me more trouble than a walk through the Pharaoh's garden. Well, my audience, read the book to find out what happened to the rebellious priest and the rebellious Pharaoh, and learn a lot about the ancient world. And ponder what else may be hidden in the subterranean worlds under our feet. And again, I wonder what are the sources used by the Polish writer. There is an Egyptian proverb, man is afraid of time, and time is afraid of the pyramids. Its meaning is that the Egyptian pyramids are so ancient that it is impossible to count their age. Interestingly, a variety of sources confirm that the Egyptian civilization is much older than is commonly believed. Officially, it is considered that the history of civilized Egypt began around the 5th millennium BC. However, many sources cite completely different dates and indicate that a developed civilization already existed in Egypt long before that time. The famous Herodotus, for example, in Euterpe, the second part of his famous history, wrote this: until now the Egyptians and their priests have passed on to me tales of ancient times. They explained to me that 341 generations of people had passed from the time of the first Egyptian king to this last priest of Hephaestus. And during the time there were as many high priests and kings. But 300 generations is 10,000 years, counting 3 generations per century. Yes, in addition to 300, 40 more generations give 1,340 years. These numbers given by the so-called father of history are much higher than those accepted in the official historiography of Egypt. The Byzantine historian George Syncellus, who lived in the 8th century, also wrote quite interesting things about the ancient Egyptian dynasties. The Egyptians have a certain slab called the Old Chronicle. It contains 30 dynasties for 113 generations over a period of 36,525 years. The first dynasty of princes is the Orutites, the second is the Mastroenis, the third is the Egyptians. The famous philosopher and scientist Diogenes generally claimed that the Egyptians conducted astronomical observations almost 49,000 years before the appearance of Alexander the Great, by the way, who was born in 356 BC. And the Greek philosopher Simplicius, who lived in the 6th century AD, went even further and wrote that the Egyptians had been studying the cosmos or outer space for 630,000 years. And here's what the Egyptians themselves wrote. Let's give the floor to Manetho, who lived in the 3rd century BC. The high priest of the temple of the city of Heliopolis. Heliopolis, now the city of el-Erian near Cairo, was considered the center of scientific thought in Egypt. Many documents, ancient papyri, tablets with hieroglyphs, and other evidence of the past were stored there. All this information allowed Manetho to write a unique history of Egypt. It listed the various dynasties of the Egyptian kings, compiled according to authentic documents. However, Manetho's work was lost in a fire in the Library of Alexandria, along with many other priceless manuscripts of the ancient world. From the history of Manetho, only a few passages have been preserved, which were quoted in the works of the ancient historians Julius Africanus and Eusebius. Actually, I believe Josephus too quoted him. Here's some more information about this very interesting personality. Manetho was high priest of Sebennytus in the Delta, according to some erroneously of the Heliopolis, and lived under the first two Ptolemies. His history was written after 271 BC. Its importance rests on Manetho's ability to use hieroglyphic sources directly. Though he seems to have enjoyed considerable reputation among the contemporary Greeks, it doesn't appear from him that his history was much read in the 1st century of the Common Era. Josephus is the only writer, actually, who furnishes coherent extracts, and Josephus lived in the time of the Roman destruction of the Jewish temple. After him, Julius Africanus in 221 and Eusebius 326 extracted chronological tables of Egyptian dynasties and kings for their biblical chronographies. Both extracts were preserved by the person we made, George Cincillus. And this is what the history of Egypt looked like in the description of the priest. The first man or god in Egypt is Hephaestus, who is also known to the Egyptians as the discoverer of fire. The heir of his son Helios, the sun, was Sosis, then in turn Kronos, Osiris, Typhon, the brother of Osiris, and finally Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis. They were the first rulers of Egypt. After that, the royal power passed from one to the other without interruption, up to Bidis for 13,900 years. Then it was 1,255 years gods and demigods ruled, and again for 1,817 years another royal family gained power in the country. Then 30 more Memphis kings ruled for 1,790 years, and after them 10 more kings ruled for 350 years. Then came the reign of the spirits of the dead, which lasted 5,813 years. Well, these numbers do not correspond in any way to what we know about Egypt. The existence of the ancient rulers of Egypt is confirmed by the Turin Papyrus. It was acquired in 1820 in Luxor by the Italian Bernardino Drovetti and taken to Turin, where it is kept to this day. The papyrus was originally about 170 centimeters long, but during transportation it crumbled into several fragments. The time of its manufacture is not exactly known, but on the back there is the name of Ramses III, who ruled in 1185 to 1153 BC. This papyrus lists the names of all Egyptian pharaohs and kings, and it is obvious that this list was copied from more ancient sources. The dynasties of kings listed in it are much broader than those known to science. It is curious that it begins with the dynasty of the gods: Ptah, Ammon, Anubis, Ibis, Apis, Mnevis, and others. Well, the most curious thing is that only in 2009 it was announced that several previously unknown papyrus fragments were found in the storerooms of the Turin Museum. The question comes up: why was such a rarity lost for so many years, and what is written in these discovered pieces? It is possible that they are talking about some even more ancient dynasties. There in Italy, the Palermo stone is stored, taken out of Egypt under unknown circumstances. For a long time it lay in the Palermo Museum without arousing any interest. It was only at the end of the 19th century that this ancient black basalt slab interested researchers, and the stone began to be studied in detail. It turned out that it lists the names of the mysterious ancient rulers of Egypt, and later it turned out that this stone is one of its kind. So somewhere there may be steles with carved names of the rulers of Egypt who lived many, many millennia ago. However, the most curious evidence that the civilization of ancient Egypt is much older than one can imagine is stored in the Dendera temple. More precisely, it was kept because the enterprising Europeans who plundered Egypt in the past centuries took the certificate out of the country entirely. We're talking about the famous ceiling in the Dendera temple, which so impressed the French that they sent it entirely to Paris. Now it is kept in the Louvre, and an exact copy of it has been recreated in the temple. The zodiac circle of amazing beauty is depicted on this ceiling. But the most curious thing about this ceiling is that it later turned out that the zodiac signs on it depict the stars in the position in which they were approximately 90,000 years BC. So those who created the zodiac circle clearly saw a different sky in front of them. And a few years ago, there was some sensational news in the media which confirms that the Egyptian civilization is much older than one can imagine. An almost curious case occurred in Egypt, which proved that the pyramids were really built earlier than is commonly believed. The official history states that the construction of the pyramid of Cheops, as we call it, was completed around 2540 BC. And so two German students climbed inside this pyramid, broke off a piece, secretly took it out of the country, and checked its age in Germany. It turned out that this piece is more than 20,000 years old, and it is still unknown exactly how many thousands of years more. It is possible that a lot. But since the method of extracting information by students turned out to be, to put it mildly, illegal, the research did not receive the usual course. How can one rely on a piece stolen and smuggled out to prove the antiquity of the pyramids? So nothing really has changed in the official historiography of historical records of Egypt, and scientists bypass the secrets of the past. Many researchers claim that the priests of ancient Egypt knew the secret of obtaining artificial gold from copper, but the appearance of surplus gold could undermine the economies of countries and empires, so this knowledge was destroyed in every possible way. In 296, the Roman Emperor Diocletian issued a decree ordering the burning of all Egyptian manuscripts on the artificial production of gold. It is possible that the Alexandrian and the Carthaginian libraries were destroyed for this purpose. Interestingly, this secret knowledge could come from a very long time ago. Zaviet el-Erian is a mysterious city in Lower Egypt, located between Giza and Abu Sir. It's a closed, secret facility. To the west of the city, in a desert area, there is a necropolis with a similar name. There are 2 pyramid complexes and 5 mastaba tombs in the form of a truncated pyramid in Zaviet el-Erian. Since 1960, most of the territory of Zaviet el-Erian has been allocated for the needs of a military base. Free access to the pyramids has been restricted since 1964. Excavations in this area are prohibited. Photos taken before the 1960s show the remains of stunning structures and traces of an unknown civilization that existed on the territory of Egypt long before the pharaohs. Zaviet el-Erian is 8 kilometers from the Giza Plateau and 7 kilometers from the step pyramid of Saqqara. In the old photos of the necropolis, you can see the pyramids of Giza standing as if nearby, and at the same time much higher than the level of the unfinished pyramid of Zaviet el-Erian. How many millennia have the sands of the Sahara carried these buildings? So there are 2 pyramids in Zaviet el-Erian, a layered one and an unfinished one. The layered pyramid was supposedly built during the 3rd dynasty, quite possibly during the reign of Haba. The pyramid was supposed to be stepped, perhaps with 5 or 7 steps. No fragments of the cladding were found, which may indicate that the pyramid was not finished. The corridor leading to the interior has 32 side chambers. Now, the unfinished, the northern pyramid, belonged to the pharaoh whose name could not be established. The pyramid is in a dilapidated state. The only thing left of it is a square base with a core on which the pyramid was to be built. A split sarcophagus made of pink granite was found nearby in a trench. Scientists assume that the presence of underground chambers, but it is not possible to conduct excavations because the area has been closed to archaeologists for half a century. The authorship of the northern pyramid is attributed to Pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, Baka or Becheris. Chronologically, his name stands between Khafra and Mikerin. Becheris is the Hellenized form of the name of Pharaoh Baka, and it is found only in Manetос Aegyptica. According to him, Becheris was the son of Pharaoh Khafra. However, there is no reliable archaeological evidence of the existence of such a pharaoh. In the Turin royal list, between the names of the pharaoh Khafra and Mikerin, there is the name of another pharaoh, but it is badly damaged. In the Saqqara royal list, there's also one name between the names Khafra and Mikerin. However, it is not readable. Egyptologists have many hypotheses about this pharaoh, but at the moment, the unfinished pyramid in Zaviet el-Erian is considered the pyramid of a pharaoh named Baka. The Italian archaeologist Alexander Barsanti began to study and excavate the pyramid in 1904-1905. The total size of the pyramid was 200 by 180 meters. The entrance begins with a descending corridor, then there is a horizontal section that turns into a stone staircase. The peculiarity of the pyramid is that it is divided into 2 parts, and in the middle there is a high smooth ledge, then another horizontal corridor. The pit is filled with stone blocks to a depth of 4.5 meters. Limestone blocks are laid at the bottom, and granite blocks, each weighing 9 tons, are on the top. In the center, there is a granite block weighing 43 tons. On the western side of the burial chamber, an oval-shaped granite sarcophagus is embedded in the floor. The sarcophagus is oriented along the north-south axis. It was empty. Archaeologists believed that there was no burial in it. The length of the sarcophagus is 3.15 meters. It's 2.22 meters wide and 1.5 meters deep. The outer cover measures 2.5 0.95 multiplied by 1.90 multiplied by 0.22 meters. The archaeological group of Barsanti managed to lift limestone blocks weighing from 3 to 4 tons. Many of them were marked by stone masons in black and red paints, but the first hieroglyph in the name of the pharaoh was not red. Alexander Barsanti sketched about 60 inscriptions, but archaeologists still disagree on the name of the pharaoh who built the pyramid, and still continue to discuss the dating of the pyramid. Alessandro Barsanti excavated the pyramid until the end of his life. He believed that there were still voids under the floor of the burial chamber, where the real burial chamber is located. Such confidence was given to him by an incident that occurred in March of 1905. It was raining and the pit was filled with water by 3 meters. And around midnight the water level suddenly dropped by 2 meters and stopped. The archaeologists believed that the water had seeped down into the other rooms where the pharaoh's mummy could be located. And during the First World War, excavations were suspended. Alessandro Barsanti died in 1917, and until 1954, the pyramid and the entire complex were abandoned. Well, in 1954, if you remember, the epic film Land of the Pharaohs, directed by Howard Hawks, was shot in Egypt. In order to shoot several scenes, the pyramid was excavated again and cleared of sand. After the filming of that film, the pyramid was abandoned again, and in 1964, like I said, a military base was located around this territory, which is still there to this day. Well, currently unfinished, the northern pyramid is covered with sand. Archaeologists agree that the pyramid should be explored using modern knowledge and technology, but excavations in this area are prohibited. So who built that pyramid of Zaviet el-Erian? What prevented it from being completed? What technologies were used in processing and moving 9 and 43-ton granite blocks? How many millennia did it take the sands of the Sahara to practically hide the grandiose, monumental construction of the ancients? Considering that the pyramid is constantly covered with sand, the burial chamber is flooded with groundwater, then there is no hope that it will ever be examined more closely. And there are still a lot of such undiscovered pages of the ancient history of mankind in Egypt and elsewhere, of course. Now about a very interesting ring. It's also pertaining to ancient Egypt. The description is Italio, a figure or design carved into or beneath the surface of hard metal or stone. And it's intaglio with ptah and the name Amun-Re set in a swivel ring. On one side of this intaglio is a representation of the god Ptah before a shrine with his name. On the other side is the name Amun-Ra. This ring is kept at the Walters Museum in Baltimore in the United States. According to the description on the museum's website, it was purchased in 1930 in Cairo. Scientists believe that it was created between 664 to 322 BC. For some reason in the scientific world, it is believed that the god Ptah is depicted on it, while on the reverse side of the ring there is the inscription of Amun-Ra, the sun god, the supreme deity of the ancient Egyptians. In any case, the creature depicted on the ring is very interesting and clearly has extraterrestrial, you can say supernatural origin. By the way, in the mythology of the Egyptians, the gods had a direct relation to the cosmos, to outer space, and the pharaohs descended from the outer space gods according to the beliefs. It is curious that the deity depicted on the ring holds in his hands what some consider to be a divine staff with magical properties. Look, there's more to tell about ancient Egypt, so much more. And yet I believe there is a tremendous amount of discoveries yet to be made. Depending on the extent of the approved excavation sites and projects that the government of Egypt will allow. And maybe there are other reasons, and not only by the government of that country that's involved in the decision making. Let's leave it at that, but I do want to add something. The book Pharaoh that I urge you to read, it's a very interesting book and amazing. It was one of the favorite readings, I understand, of Joseph Stalin. That's what I heard. But Joseph Stalin was also the person, I believe, under whose orders a number of Soviet scientists who studied Egypt, Egyptologists, were arrested and killed during the Great Purges, which I mentioned in my other videos, and it's inexplicable fact. Of course, you know, his government, his regime, the ideology they believed in, the evil in itself, is responsible for the deaths of so many other people. But Egyptologists were marked among other archaeologists. So, you know, the whole history is murky and we can only guess. But if you like my research, please support me through the links you will find in the description to this video. Please like my video and please tell others about my channel. I really appreciate your attention, those who support me, and I hope to bring you more interesting stories. Thank you.